My daughter took my Social Security check and left for the beach, leaving me without food. She returned sun-kissed and happy, thinking I would be begging for help. But when she opened the refrigerator to get dinner, she screamed in horror at what she found inside. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin my story, a tale of betrayal and how I eventually chose myself, I ask for your support. Please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps stories like this reach more people. Also, let me know in the comments what city or country you're listening from. It always warms my heart to see how many of us there are. Now, enjoy the story. The front door had slammed shut 3 hours ago, but the heavy, sugary scent of Quintessa's perfume still lingered in the hallway. That fragrance always felt too intrusive to me, too loud for our old brownstone with its high ceilings, where the air was accustomed to smelling like dust and dried lavender. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the closed pantry door. The silence in the house was deafening. I used to love this silence. It meant peace after a long day at the sewing machine, when my eyes were tired from tiny stitches and my back ached from endless bending. But today, the silence felt predatory, as if it were waiting. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. It's shameful to admit, but I was hungry, just ordinary human hunger, the kind that grows persistent by evening. I walked over to the cabinet. The hinges creaked as if protesting my disturbance. The shelves were impeccably clean and terrifyingly empty. Quintessa had packed in a hurry, darting around the apartment like a bright tropical bird trapped in a cage, tossing bikinis, light sundresses, and tanning lotions into her suitcase. I remembered how she had stopped in the doorway, already wearing her shoes, and held out her hand. Mama, give me your card just in case. What if the ATM down there doesn't work? But Quintessa, I tried to object, feeling a chill run down my spine. That's my whole Social Security check. What am I supposed to live on for 2 weeks? Oh, don't start. She rolled her eyes, snatching the card from my fingers. You've got a full jar of grits. Boil them up, add a little butter, and it'll be beautiful. It'll be good for you to detox. Doctors recommend a diet for everyone at your age. Don't invent problems where there aren't any. I deserve this vacation. And she left. She flew off to Miami, to the sun, to cocktails with little umbrellas, taking my money, my peace of mind, and, as it turned out, my food with her. Grits. Right, she mentioned grits. I reached for the top shelf where an old glass jar labeled grits stood in my own handwriting from around 20 years ago. The jar felt suspiciously light. I took off the lid and looked inside. At the bottom, among some grayish dust, lay a few lonely grains. There wasn't enough to feed a sparrow, let alone a grown woman. She had lied, or maybe she just didn't care. She hadn't even bothered to check if there was food before condemning me to this starvation diet. My chest went cold. It wasn't the kind of cold you get from a draft. It was an ice that starts growing from the inside when you realize that the person you carried, nursed, and raised isn't just selfish. They are cruel. I closed the jar and put it back. The sound of glass against wood rang out like a gunshot. I had to do something. Maybe some loose change. Quintessa often scattered coins, shaking them out of her jeans pockets. I headed to her room. Chaos reigned here. Clothes were strewn on chairs, open tubes of lipstick on the vanity, crumpled receipts on the floor. I began methodically searching the surfaces under a stack of glossy magazines. Nothing. In the jewelry dish, empty. My gaze fell on a crumpled piece of paper carelessly tossed at the trash bin but missing the mark. I bent down and picked it up. It was a printout of the hotel reservation and flight itinerary. I smoothed the sheet out on the tabletop. The letters danced before my eyes, but I saw the total figure immediately. It was bold, black, and merciless. The amount my daughter had spent on 2 weeks of beach relaxation was exactly equal to 3 months of my benefits. 3. I stood in the dimness of her room, feeling as if the walls were closing in. For years, I had darned my old stockings. I had turned coats inside out to remake them, coats I'd been wearing since before the turn of the century. I denied myself an extra peach to buy her the best shoes for school, then for college, then just because. Mama, this is what's in style now. I walked out of her room, pulling the door firmly shut behind me, as if cutting myself off from that smell of carelessness and betrayal. The living room met me with silent grandeur. Here, In the light of the street lamps filtering through the heavy velvet curtains stood my treasures, my jailers, the antique oak buffet, carved and heavy as a tombstone. Inside, behind the glass, the crystal and fine Haviland Limoges porcelain gleamed dully, a service for 12, which we had eaten from maybe twice in our lives. This is for Quintessa's wedding, I used to tell myself. The wedding never happened, but the china waited. On the dresser stood a silver tea service that had been passed down to me from my grandmother. Next to it, a jewelry box with pieces I never wore, because where would an old woman like me go in this? Let it stay for the grandchildren. In the hall closet hung fur coats smelling of mothballs, which Quintessa contemptuously called dust collectors, but which were worth a fortune. I looked around my living room. This wasn't a home, it was a museum, the Quintessa Johnson Museum. And I wasn't the mistress of the house, I was the unpaid curator. A curator who shuffles around in worn slippers, wipes dust off the exhibits, and starves to death so that one day a visitor can come and take everything without even saying thank you. My stomach growled treacherously again, but now something else mixed with the sound. Anger? No, anger is a hot feeling. This was clarity, icy, crystal clear clarity. I walked over to the coffee table where a stack of old newspapers lay. Quintessa always scolded me for not throwing them out. Junk, trash, she would snort. But I knew that in the classified section, there was something I needed. I had seen the ad a week ago, circled it in pencil just out of habit, never admitting the thought that I might need it. I sorted through the papers. There it was, the City Chronicle, the page with private ads. The red pencil circle was barely visible in the dim light, but I knew what it said. Mr. Alistair Sterling. I buy antiques, porcelain, silver, rarities, honest appraisal, house calls. I looked at the telephone. Old rotary, reliable, I whispered into the void. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone was long and steady. I started turning the dial, entering the number, digit after digit. Every turn of the dial took effort, as if I were cracking a safe where my own life had been locked away. It started ringing. Hello, a male voice answered, slightly raspy but polite. Listening. I took a deep breath of air that smelled like the dust of my museum. Good evening. My voice sounded unexpectedly firm, even to myself. Is this Mr. Sterling? My name is Uli. Do you buy sterling silver flatware? I do. Professional interest appeared in his voice. What period are we talking about? I looked at the empty velvet case where the spoon should have been, then shifted my gaze to the buffet. Yes, early 20th century, I said. I want to sell it tomorrow. Mr. Sterling turned out to be punctual. At exactly 9 in the morning, the doorbell sliced through the silence of the brownstone, making me flinch. I hadn't slept all night, sitting in the armchair opposite the buffet like a sentry guarding treasures before surrendering them to the enemy. But the enemy was no longer poverty. The enemy was my own submissiveness. I opened the door. On the threshold stood a man of about 60 in a neat gray overcoat and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked intellectual, black, distinguished, but his keen, observant eyes betrayed a man used to appraising not just things, but people. Mrs. Uli, he asked, tilting his head slightly. I am Alistair. We spoke yesterday. Come in. Don't take off your shoes. I stepped back, letting him inside. He walked into the living room, and I saw his gaze slide over the walls, the heavy furniture, the paintings. He had expected to see another grandmother with cheap trinkets, silver-plated knickknacks, and a hope to get at least a penny. But when he saw the furnishings, his eyebrows rose ever so slightly. You have an interesting home, he noted cautiously. This isn't a home, I replied dryly. It's a storage facility. I walked to the sideboard and took out the heavy case lined with worn velvet. The latch clicked. I threw back the lid. On the dark green lining lay 12 silver spoons. They were massive with intricate engraving on the handles, the monograms of my great-grandparents intertwined with grapevines. Quintessa adored them. She often took out this set, stroked the cold metal with her fingers, and said, When I get married, Mama, we'll eat cake with these on our anniversary. This was her dowry, a dowry she hadn't even bothered to take with her while leaving to burn through my money. Mr. Sterling put on white cotton gloves, took a loop from his pocket, and leaned over the table. Silence hung in the room, broken only by his breathing and the soft clink of metal as he carefully turned a spoon. Gorham Chantilly pattern, he murmured more to himself than to me. Early production. The condition is marvelous. These have hardly been used. Never, I corrected. They were admired. He straightened up, took off his glasses, and looked at me with new interest. A rare and expensive item. Usually, in these cases, they offer the scrap price, but that would be sacrilege. I can offer you. He named a sum. The sum was impressive. It equaled 5 of my monthly checks. A month ago, I would have fainted from happiness. I would have grabbed that money and hidden it under the mattress for a rainy day. But today, something different woke up inside me. Years spent at fabric markets, where I haggled for every inch of silk for my clients to save them a dime, suddenly made themselves known. No, I said firmly. Alcester blinked. Excuse me, this is Gorham, early period. I repeated his words, looking him straight in the eye. A full set in the original case without a single scratch. You will sell these to a collector for 3 times what you offered me. I'm not asking for the market price, Mr. Sterling. I'm asking for a fair dealer's price. I named my figure. It was 40% higher than his offer. He chuckled, wrinkles gathering at the corners of his eyes. You, Mrs. Uli, are not as simple as you seem. Life teaches you, I parried. All right, we have a deal. He paused for another second, weighing whether to haggle, but apparently realizing that before him stood not a desperate old lady, but a business partner. Deal. 10 minutes later, he left, taking the case with him, and I remained standing in the middle of the room, clutching a thick stack of bills in my hand. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline, pure, intoxicating energy. I had just sold Quintessa's dowry. I had sold a piece of family history, and I didn't feel a drop of guilt. I felt the weight that had pressed on my shoulders for years become just a little lighter. I didn't hide the money. I put it in my purse, donned my best coat, beige cashmere, kept for special occasions, and walked out of the house. My legs carried me on their own, but not to the usual discount supermarket with yellow price tags and wilted cabbage. I was walking downtown to the Epicurean market. I hadn't been there in 15 years. The prices there bit so hard it was scary to even look at the windows. But today, I wasn't planning to look. The heavy doors swung open before me, and I was washed over by the smell of fresh baking, coffee, and expensive spices. I walked past the shelves like a queen returning from exile. I didn't look at potatoes. I didn't look for discounts on pasta. I went to the deli counter. Weigh me out 1/2 pound of prosciutto di Parma, please, I told the clerk, and some of that Virginia ham. Then came the cheese section. I took a wedge of aged Parmesan and a soft brie with truffles. I grabbed a jar of olives stuffed with almonds. I bought a fresh baguette, still warm and crusty, and then I saw them, peaches, huge and velvety, filled with sunshine, lying on a woven tray. Out of season, of course, imported. They cost as much as an airplane wing. 2, I said, pointing to the most beautiful ones. And finally, the seafood section. Cold smoked salmon, thin slices, translucent in the light, the color of sunset. I walked out of the market with 2 paper bags. They weren't heavy, but they contained more life than all my stock of grits over the last 10 years. At home, I didn't eat in the kitchen with its oil tablecloth. I went into the living room. I took a snow-white tablecloth with handmade lace out of the sideboard. Quintessa had forbidden me to use it. You'll stain it, Mama. That's for guests. Today I am the guest, I said aloud to the empty room. I spread the tablecloth, took out the best plate from that very service, thin porcelain with a gold rim. I laid out a silver fork. I still had forks. Knives and dessert spoons were also plentiful. I had only sold the teaspoons. I arranged my purchases. I rolled the slices of ham into rosettes, cut the cheese into olives, salmon, and warm bread that I broke with my hands, crumbling right onto the tablecloth, and the peach. I bit into it, and sweet juice splashed onto my lips. The taste was incredible. It wasn't just the taste of food. It was the taste of freedom. The taste of the fact that I exist, that I am important, that my body, my stomach, my desires matter. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, washing it all down with black tea from a ceremonial cup. I looked at the blank wall where the calendar hung and realized that all these years I had been saving things for a future that might never come. I lived in expectation that someone would appreciate my sacrifice. But sacrifices aren't appreciated, they are used. When I finished, only crumbs remained on the plate. I felt a fullness I hadn't experienced in a very long time, a calm, dignified fullness. I stood up and walked to the sideboard. The place where the spoon case had stood gaped with emptiness. The dust there was slightly lighter, outlining a rectangle. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the long receipt from the gourmet market. I carefully smoothed it out and placed it right in the center of that light rectangle in place of the family silver. On the receipt, amidst the list of delicacies, the word total was printed in large letters. I smiled at my reflection in the glass of the sideboard. Dinner, I whispered. It was just dinner. The week flew by like one long sunny day. I woke up not to an alarm clock to run to the cheap store for discounts, but when the sun touched my pillow. I had croissants with butter for breakfast, not empty oatmeal. And so, as I sat in the armchair with a glass of rich red wine, a Cabernet from 2015, recommended by the sommelier at the wine boutique, the phone rang. The ring was harsh, demanding. I knew who it was without even picking up. Only Quintessa knew how to call, as if the telephone should apologize for not ringing sooner. "Hello," I said, bringing the receiver to my ear without setting down my glass. "Mama," my daughter's voice burst into my silence. In the background, the ocean roared, seagulls screamed, and some rhythmic music played. "How are you doing there? Still alive?" There was so much feigned concern in her voice, mixed with blatant superiority, that the wine seemed sour for a moment. "Alive? Quintessa, quite," I replied calmly. "I was thinking," she spoke loudly, shouting over the surf. "You're probably bored there alone and hungry. You boil those grits, but add more water. It's more filling that way. Old Grandma's recipe, remember?" I took a sip of wine. The velvety taste returned, washing away the bitterness of her words. "I'm managing," I answered calmly. "Don't worry." "Oh, come on. Don't put on a brave face," she chuckled. "I know you've got nothing to eat there, but it's okay. Hold on for another week. By the way, I saw a fridge magnet for you shaped like a dolphin. If, of course, you don't run up the electric bill while I'm gone because I know you, you'll forget to turn off the light in the bathroom and I'll have to pay for it later." She spoke to me like an unreasonable child, like a burden that needed to be controlled even from 1,000 miles away. Before, I would have started making excuses. I would have said, "No, no, baby, I'm saving. I don't even turn on the TV." But now, I just smiled at my reflection in the dark window. "I'm finding resources Quintessa didn't even suspect existed," I said, looking at the wine bottle on the table. "So, don't worry about the lights." "Resources?" She laughed again, and there was so much smugness in that laugh. "What are you talking about? Found some change in the sofa or went to Miss Theodosia for salt? Look, don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. I got to go. We have a pool party. Don't get bored there with your porridge." Click. She hung up, confident in her complete, undivided power over me. In her picture of the world, I was sitting right now in a dark kitchen, choking on plain porridge, counting the days until her return so I could gratefully accept a magnet and a new portion of reproaches. She thought she had broken me, that the hunger training was successful. I finished the wine, feeling the warmth spread through my body. "Pool party," I repeated, placing the empty glass on the table. "Well, I have my own plans too." I picked up the notebook lying next to the phone. On the open page, a time was already written down. Tomorrow, 11 sharp. Alice Deester S. I had planned to sell the wardrobe, that huge oak closet in the hallway that took up half the passage and always snagged my sleeves with its carved corners. It was antique, expensive, but I hated it. It was a dark spot that absorbed light. But after the conversation with Quintessa, I changed my mind. The wardrobe, that's too much hassle. Movers, noise, dust. I wanted something elegant, something that would hit her just as painfully as her words about watering down the grits. I got up and went to the dresser in the bedroom. There, in the top drawer, lay another jewelry box, smaller. I opened it. On a velvet cushion lay a brooch, an antique gold piece in the shape of a twig, with leaves studded with small diamonds and a large dark ruby in the center. This ruby burned like a drop of thick blood. Quintessa adored this brooch. She never asked for permission. She just took it when she went on a date or to an office party. "Mama, it's vintage. It's all the rage right now," she would say, pinning the brooch to the lapel of her blazer. She considered this thing hers, just like the apartment, just like me. I took the brooch in my hands. The stone was cold but quickly warmed up in my palm. I remembered how Quintessa once lost the clasp from it and didn't even apologize. Well, fix it. You're a seamstress, she tossed out then. And I fixed it. Tomorrow, Mr. Sterling would come to appraise the wardrobe, but he wouldn't leave with it. In the morning, the antique dealer was precise as always. Good morning, Mrs. Uli, he smiled, tipping his hat. Ready to part with the giant in the hallway? I shook my head, inviting him in. I changed my mind about the wardrobe, Alistair. Changed my mind for now. Too much fuss. But I have something else, something more personal. I held out the brooch to him. Mr. Sterling's eyes lit up with professional excitement. He carefully took the piece, held it up to the light, and put on his inevitable loupe. Oh, he exhaled. Late 19th century St. Petersburg work, perhaps? No, likely New Orleans Creole craftsmanship. The ruby is natural, unheated, very deep color, and old mine-cut diamonds. This is a piece with character. How much? I asked. He named a price. It was twice as high as for the spoons. It was money one could live on comfortably for 6 months or treat oneself to 2 weeks of paradise. It's yours, I said, not bargaining this time. The price was fair, and my desire to get rid of this thing was burning. When Alcester counted out the bills, I looked at the brooch one last time. It lay on the table, sparkling in a sunbeam. Beautiful, predatory, alien. You know, Alcester said, putting the brooch into a special pouch, this item surely has a history. It does, I nodded, taking the money. But the history has ended. Now it's just stone and metal. He left, and I was alone again. I looked at the spot in the jewelry box where the ruby used to lie. Emptiness. But this emptiness wasn't frightening. It promised new possibilities. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of a food delivery service from that very restaurant I always walked past, lowering my eyes so as not to see the prices on the menu displayed on the street. Good afternoon, I said. I want to place an order. Yes, delivery. Write this down. Crab and avocado salad, veal medallions with mushroom sauce. And I thought for a second, remembering Quintessa's words about water in the grits and a bottle of champagne, the coldest you have. I hung up and felt a spring uncoil inside me. Quintessa would be back in a week. She would look for her favorite vintage brooch to show off her tan and new jewelry to her girlfriends. Let her look. Meanwhile, I would drink to her health and to the fact that I really did find resources, not in the sofa, but in the self-respect I had finally bought back. The champagne sparkled in the glass, lifting tiny bubbles from the bottom, but the festive mood evaporated suddenly. As soon as I opened the bottom drawer of the secretary desk, I was looking for the certificate for a painting, a landscape with a river by an unknown artist from the late 19th century that hung in the living room. Alistair hinted that with papers, the price would be higher. The drawer was stuffed with old receipts, warranty cards for appliances broken long ago, and other paper junk that Quintessa had dumped here for years. I started sorting through the papers irritably, setting aside instructions for an iron and a hairdryer. And then my fingers hit a thick plastic folder shoved deep under a stack of old Essence magazines. The folder wasn't mine. I never bought such bright red, screaming colors. I pulled it out into the light. Inside lay several sheets stapled together. On top was a glossy brochure, cheap paper, bad printing, blurry photos of smiling old people playing checkers. Restful Meadow State Facility for Veterans and Seniors. The name seemed familiar. I had heard about it somewhere. Miss Theodosia, the neighbor, told terrible things, said it smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage, that the staff was rude, and the old folks lay for days staring at the ceiling because no one cared about them. It was a state institution, the most budget-friendly one with a bad reputation, a place where they send you to wait for the end, to be forgotten. My hands started to shake. I set aside the brochure and picked up the next document. It was a draft, a general power of attorney. In the header, my details. In the agent field, Quintessa Johnson. And below, in fine print, a list of powers. The right to manage all property, sell real estate, represent interests in medical institutions. A date was penciled in the margins, next month immediately after her return. The world tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table so I wouldn't fall. The air in the room suddenly became thick and viscous. This wasn't just selfishness. This was a plan, a cold, calculated plan. She wasn't just waiting for me to die to get the inheritance. She was tired of waiting. She decided to check me into restful meadows like an old item to the scrapyard to free up the apartment, sell the antiques, and live easy on my money while I rotted in a government ward. She smiled at me, took my card, went to the sea at my expense, knowing that in a month she would kick me out of my own home. Tears didn't flow. Instead, a wave of such fury rose inside me that I thought I would scream, but I stayed silent. The fury forged itself into action. If before I sold things just to eat and pamper myself a little, now this was war. I threw the folder back into the drawer but didn't close it, let it lie there as a reminder. I grabbed the phone. The ringing seemed infinitely long. "Mr. Sterling?" My voice rang like a taut string. "It's Uli. Have you gone far?" "I'm still in the neighborhood, Uli," he responded with surprise. "Did something happen? Did you find something else interesting?" "I found a reason." I cut him off. "Come back and bring a truck." "Everything?" Disbelief sounded in his voice. "Mrs. Uli, are you sure? That is a serious decision." "Absolutely. I'm selling the painting, the clock, the rug, and that service in the buffet. Everything that has value. Come immediately." The next 2 hours passed in a fog. Allister arrived with two sturdy guys. They silently and carefully carried my life out in pieces. The landscape with the river was taken off the wall, leaving a light rectangle on the wallpaper. The antique grandfather clock, whose chiming had measured time in this apartment for the last 50 years, fell silent and was wrapped in bubble wrap. The Persian rug, worn but still luxurious, was rolled into a heavy cylinder. I stood and watched the room empty. With every item carried out, it became easier to breathe, as if they weren't carrying out furniture, but stones from my soul. The apartment was becoming spacious, light, and mine, no longer a museum, just a dwelling. Allister wrote checks and counted out cash. The sum grew. It was becoming obscenely huge for a pensioner. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" he asked quietly as the movers carried out the last box of porcelain. "I will regret only one thing, Allister," I replied, looking at the empty wall, "that I didn't do this sooner." When the door closed behind them, I was left alone in the echoing hallway. In my hands was a bag stuffed with money, a real fortune. I didn't delay. First, I called a cleaning company. I need a deep clean, washing windows, walls, floors, everything completely so that not a speck of dust remains, so it smells of freshness, not old age. "Can a crew come today? I'll pay double." The dispatcher on the other end choked, but quickly agreed. Then I opened the website of an elite gourmet boutique, the kind that delivers groceries to stars and moguls. I scrolled through the catalog without looking at the prices. Black caviar, beluga, jars of 4 aughts, 8 aughts, add to cart. Truffles, white seasonal, add to cart. Foie gras, whole duck liver, add to cart. Vintage champagne, Dom Perignon. Exotic fruits, dragon fruit, mangosteen, papaya, add to cart. Cheeses, cured meats, handmade chocolate. I clicked and clicked until the order total exceeded the cost of my annual maintenance at that Restful Meadows nursing home. "Delivery today," I told the operator, confirming the order as soon as possible. By evening, the apartment shone. The windows were crystal clear, letting in the setting sun, which now flooded the empty living room with golden light. It smelled of expensive cleaning products and lilies. I ordered a huge bouquet just because, for beauty. The courier rang the doorbell. He wasn't alone. There were two of them struggling to carry huge thermal boxes. We went into the kitchen. The refrigerator, an old reliable Kelvinator that hummed like a tractor, stood in the corner. I threw open its door. Inside was empty and clean. Only a lonely bulb illuminated the white shelves. "Load it up," I commanded. The couriers exchanged glances, but started working. Blue tin jars of caviar stood in neat rows on the top shelf. Next to them lay blocks of golden butter and packages of truffles. The middle shelf filled with cheeses and meat delicacies. In the vegetable drawer, instead of the usual carrots and beets, bright alien fruits now showed off. Bottles of champagne lay on their sides, taking up the special rack. The fridge was filling up. It was becoming heavy, dense, saturated. The shelves sagged barely noticeably under the weight of luxury. There was enough food here for a company of soldiers if those soldiers ate exclusively delicacies. "Anything else?" the courier asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yes," I said. "Try to squeeze that box of Belgian chocolates onto the door." When they finished, the fridge was packed to the gills. There wasn't room for even a matchbox. This wasn't a refrigerator. It was Alibaba's cave, only edible. I paid, gave a generous tip, and closed the door behind them. I walked to the fridge, grabbed the handle, and opened it. The light of the bulb reflected in the gold foil of the champagne and the glossy sides of the caviar jars. The cold air smelled not of soup and medicine, but of wealth. I stood and looked at this abundance. This was my answer, my shield, my sword. Quintessa wanted to send me to the scrap heap to get an inheritance. Well, the inheritance is now here in this fridge, chilled and ready for consumption, but not by her. I closed the door. The click of the latch sounded like a verdict. The wait wasn't long. 2 weeks of silence ended exactly at noon when a key scratched in the lock. I was sitting in the kitchen with my back to the hallway, drinking tea or coffee. No, tea, real Darjeeling, tart and fragrant. The cup in my hands was thin, almost transparent. I didn't flinch. I waited. The door swung open with a crash, hitting the wall. The noise of the street, the smell of airplane fuel and hot asphalt burst into the apartment. "Mama, I'm home." Quintessa's voice boomed like a victor's fanfare. "I hope you've humbled yourself enough to apologize for your behavior before I left. I'm tired from the trip and don't want to listen to your whining." The sound of heavy suitcase wheels dragging across the parquet floor followed. She entered, expecting the usual semi-darkness, the smell of medicine, and my hunched figure rushing to meet her with slippers in hand. She expected to see her victim, broken, hungry, and guilty. But instead, she was met by a smell, not of mustiness, but of fresh lilies, a huge bouquet of which stood in a vase on the floor, and the subtle trail of my new perfume, sandalwood and jasmine. Quintessa froze on the threshold. I heard her sniffing the air, trying to understand what was happening. "What is that smell?" she asked suspiciously. "Did you spill air freshener or something?" She took a step forward and suddenly stopped. The sound of her heels was too echoing. "Wait!" A note of confusion slipped into her voice. "Why is it so spacious in here?" She looked around. Her gaze slid over the floor where the heavy Persian rug, which always collected dust, was no longer. She looked at the corner where grandfather's floor clock used to stand. Its ticking had driven her crazy in childhood. Now it was empty there, just a clean, light wall. "Mama," she called out, quieter now, but immediately shook her head, driving away the strange feeling of wrongness. "Okay, we'll figure out later where you shoved everything again. I'm hungry as a wolf. They fed us some garbage on the plane." She dropped her purse right on the floor and marched decisively toward the kitchen. I didn't even turn around. I just took another sip of tea and placed the cup on the saucer. Clink. The sound was quiet but distinct. Quintessa walked into the kitchen. She was tanned to redness. Her nose was peeling. She was wearing a bright sundress with a floral print that looked alien in this strict, clean kitchen. "So, what do we have?" she asked aggressively, not really greeting me. "I bet you didn't cook anything except your porridge. I could eat a sandwich right now, even with butter, if yours hasn't gone rancid." She walked past me like I was furniture. I sat straight, squaring my shoulders in a new silk robe of emerald color, but she didn't notice the robe or my calmness. She was led by hunger and the habit of commanding. She walked up to the refrigerator, her hand with chipped nail polish reaching for the handle. She had already taken a breath to start a tirade about what a bad hostess I was, how tired she was of carrying everything on her shoulders, and how empty our fridge was. "Open it," I said quietly. Quintessa didn't hear or didn't pay attention. She yanked the door toward herself with such force as if she wanted to rip it off. The door flew open, the light flared up, and Quintessa screamed. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a yelp of pure animal terror and misunderstanding. She recoiled as if she saw the head of Medusa, the Gorgon inside. Before her, tightly packed from bottom to top, lay her inheritance. At eye level towered neat stacks of blue tin jars. Black caviar, beluga, the most expensive, the rarest. There were many of them, dozens of jars shining under the electric light. Lower down on the shelf where cabbage usually rotted lay misted bottles of Dom Perignon. Labels with vintage years looked at her with silent reproach. Wheels of blue cheese wrapped in craft paper, truffles looking like precious stones in special glass flasks, bright pink sides of dragon fruit, yellow mangoes, purple mangosteen, a riot of colors this kitchen had never seen. On the door, instead of ketchup and mayonnaise, crowded boxes of Belgian chocolates and jars of foie gras. The fridge was bursting, it groaned with abundance. It was a feast during a plague, but the plague was the poverty I had banished. Quintessa stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide open, shock splashing in them. She shifted her gaze from the caviar to the champagne, from the champagne to the truffles. Her brain refused to process the information. A poor pensioner who was supposed to be boiling grits in water could not have the refrigerator of an Arab sheikh. "What?" she squeezed out. Her voice broke into a squeal. "What is this?" She reached out a trembling hand and touched a cold jar of caviar as if checking if it was real. The jar was real, icy, heavy. Quintessa turned to me, her face going pale. The tan began to look like a dirty stain. "Mama, where from?" I slowly turned my head and looked at her. There was no fear in my eyes, no love, only calm. "I was hungry, Quintessa," I said simply, "and you took my card. I had to improvise." Quintessa snatched a jar of caviar from the shelf, gripping it as if it were a grenade. Metal clinked against her rings. "What does this mean?" she shrieked, poking the jar in my direction. "Where did you get the money for this? This is a fortune. Did you steal? Did you get a loan? Do you realize how much interest they'll charge?" She didn't wait for an answer. She darted around the kitchen. Her eyes darted feverishly. Suddenly, she froze, and her gaze darted to the hallway, toward the living room. It finally started to dawn on her what she had missed in the first minutes: the emptiness. She threw the jar on the table. It rolled with a crash, nearly knocking over my cup, and dashed into the room. I heard her stomping, then the sound of drawers opening, then her scream full of panic. "Where is the jewelry box, Mama?" She ran back out, holding the empty velvet case for the spoons. It was open like the maw of a dead beast. The spoons, the silver. She was gasping for air. The ruby brooch, the clock. "Mama, where is the clock?" She looked around, seeing every missing thing now, light spots on the wallpaper where paintings hung, the empty corner without the clock, the bare parquet without the rug. "We've been robbed," she exhaled, her face twisted in horror. "Lord, while I was gone, you let someone in. You forgot to lock the door. God, what a nightmare. We have to call the police immediately." She grabbed her phone. Her fingers trembled, trying to unlock the screen. "No police, Quintessa," I said. My voice sounded quiet, but in this hysteria, it was like an icy shower. I put the cup on the saucer. Clink. A sharp, short sound that put a period to her panic. "What do you mean, no need?" She stared at me like I was crazy. "Don't you understand? They took everything, everything valuable." "Nobody stole anything." I looked her right in the eye. My gaze was heavy, calm. "I sold it." The phone fell from her hands and hit the floor with a thud. "Sold it?" she repeated in a whisper. The word was unfamiliar to her, alien. To whom? Why? "I told you, I was hungry." I stood up and walked to the table where the jar of caviar lay. I picked it up, feeling the pleasant coolness. "You took my check, left me an empty grits jar, and a person needs to eat, so I decided." I paused, enjoying the moment. "I decided to have your brooch for breakfast, on toast with butter. It went down just wonderfully. And yesterday I drank grandfather's clock. Mahogany has an excellent aftertaste, it turns out, especially if it's Chateau Margaux." It started to dawn on her. I saw the gears in her head grinding, connecting the facts: empty walls, full fridge, my calm appearance. Her face began to change. Horror gave way to anger, and then to the realization of a monstrous loss. She looked at the jar in my hand, not as food, but as liquid gold, as her apartment, car, comfortable life, which I had just turned into an appetizer. "You," she hissed, stepping toward me, "you ate my inheritance. You ate through the antiques. Are you out of your mind? That was my money, mine. I saved it." "You saved it?" I chuckled. "You didn't even wipe the dust off it, Quintessa. You just waited for me to vacate the premises." "You're crazy," she screamed. "Senile old woman. How could you? It's a family heirloom." "Memory," I interrupted. "Memory of what? Of how we lived in poverty, sitting on chests of gold? No, daughter. They were just things, and they fulfilled their final purpose. They fed the mistress." Quintessa rushed to the refrigerator. She was shaking. "I'll save at least something," she shouted, grabbing everything she could from the shelves. "This can be returned, sold back. I won't let you devour this." She grabbed 2 jars of caviar and a bottle of champagne, clutching them to her chest like rescued children. Give it back, she barked, seeing that I wasn't moving. It's mine. I'll take it back to the store. Do you have the receipt? I looked at her, this grown woman acting like a greedy child, at her tanned face distorted by greed, and nothing remained in me but disgust. I walked right up to her, pressing her back against the open fridge door. Put it back, I said. No, she squealed. It's money. It's my money. Then I slapped my palm on the table. Bam! The sound was crisp, commanding. The cup jumped on the saucer. Put it back. My voice had become commanding. I had never spoken to her in such a tone, even when she was little. That is my dinner, and you have no money. Remember, you spent it all on the beach. Quintessa froze. She had never seen me like this. She was used to Mama Mouse, Mama Shadow, and now before her stood the mistress. She tried to object, but the grip of her fingers loosened. You have no money, Quintessa, I repeated, enunciating every word. You came to an empty apartment to a mother who has no check. You wanted me to starve? Well, then now we'll starve together. Only I will be eating caviar, and you will watch because this is my food bought with my money. Slowly, with an expression of the deepest suffering on her face, she put the jars on the table. The champagne clinked glass against glass. You'll regret this, she whispered, and angry tears flashed in her eyes. You will regret this. You are clearly not all there. A normal person wouldn't do this. She straightened up, and a new frightening determination appeared on her face. I am calling a doctor right now. You are dangerous to yourself and others. You are selling off property in a fit of madness. You need to be treated, and the transaction will be declared invalid. She turned and ran out of the kitchen, picking up her phone from the floor on the go. Hello, 911? I need an ambulance. Psychiatric help, urgent. My mother is having an acute psychotic episode. I stood and listened as she called the brigade. There was no fear. I took the jar of caviar she had just held and calmly opened it. The click of the lid sounded like a starter pistol before the final race. Try it, I said quietly, scooping up black grains with a spoon. Try to prove it. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Quintessa was darting around the hallway like a wounded animal, grabbing the phone, running to the window. Finally, she exhaled and rushed to open it. Come in quickly. She's in the kitchen. She is completely inadequate. But on the threshold stood not orderlies in white coats. Standing there was Miss Theodosia, our upstairs neighbor, in her invariable floral housecoat, and looming behind her back was Alistair Sterling. He had come to pick up the last box of books we had agreed upon this morning. Quintessa, Miss Theodosia blinked in surprise, looking at the disheveled daughter. What's all the screaming? I thought there was a fire, and this gentleman rang too. Miss Theodosia, you're a witness. Quintessa grabbed the neighbor by the arm and dragged her into the apartment. Mama has lost her mind. She sold everything clean out, furniture, silver, paintings. She bought some food with that money and is sitting there eating. It's senile psychosis. I read about it. She doesn't know what she's doing. I need confirmation to annul the deals. You saw she was always strange. Quintessa dragged the neighbor into the kitchen where I sat at the table, spreading butter on crisp toast. I was calm, wearing the same elegant emerald robe, my hair neatly styled and light makeup on my face, which I hadn't done in 10 years. Uli, the neighbor asked cautiously. Quintessa says, are you sick? I am healthy, Theodosia. I smiled at her and gestured for her to enter. Would you like tea? Earl Grey and a sandwich with caviar, real caviar. Theodosia's eyes widened when she saw the table. With caviar, she repeated weakly. She doesn't understand, Quintessa yelled, stomping her foot. Don't you see? She blew a fortune on delicacies. This is a clear sign of dementia, loss of financial control. At that moment, Mr. Sterling entered the kitchen. He coughed delicately. Pardon me, ladies. The door was open. Quintessa pounced on him like a hawk. And you're a scammer. You took advantage of the helpless state of an elderly person. I will sue you. You will return all the things. My mother is incompetent. Mr. Sterling didn't even wince. He calmly placed his briefcase on a chair, took out his glasses, and put them on. Incompetent? He repeated softly. Allow me to disagree. I have been in the antique business for 40 years. I have seen many sellers, and I can assure you your mother is one of the most astute and tough negotiators I have met. He pulled a folder of documents from his briefcase. Here are the bills of sale for every item signed by Mrs. Uli personally. And note, attached to every contract is a certificate from a notary attesting that the seller is of sound mind and memory. We arranged this specifically for seeing such family scenes. Quintessa snatched the papers, her eyes racing across the lines, seals, signatures, notary stamps. Everything was clean, legally flawless. But she gasped, "But she's eating the money. That's not normal." "And what is normal, Quintessa?" suddenly piped up Miss Theodosia. She was already sitting at the table and taking a bite of a $50 sandwich with appetite. "Uli saved on you her whole life, wore the same coat for 10 years. And did you ever buy her a chocolate bar? And now she sold her own things to eat like a human being, and suddenly she's crazy?" "You don't understand." Quintessa was on the verge of hysteria. Her plan was collapsing. Her arguments were crumbling to dust. That was my inheritance. She didn't have the right. "She did," cut in Mr. Sterling, taking the folder back from her. "It is her property, and she disposed of it as she saw fit." Silence hung in the kitchen. Quintessa stood in the middle of the room, red, sweaty, humiliated. Everyone was looking at her, me with icy calm, Alistair with professional indifference, Theodosia judgingly chewing a sandwich. Quintessa realized she had lost the battle for the diagnosis. Calling doctors was pointless, the police even more so. "Fine," she hissed, narrowing her eyes. "Fine, you won this round. Mama ate everything. Good for you. But we still have to live. And when you run out of your delicacies, who will hand you a glass of water? Me? Don't count on it. I won't forgive you for this. I live here, and I will turn your life into hell. You'll regret not dying of hunger." She turned to leave, to slam the door. She thought she had one last trump card left: her presence, her youth, her ability to bully me in my own home. "Stop," I said. I didn't raise my voice, but there was something in it that made her stop. I slowly pulled out the table drawer, the very one where I had moved the fines from her room. "You are so worried about my future, Quintessa, about who will hand me a glass of water, about where I will live when I get really old." I took out the red brochure, Restful Meadows State Facility, and the draft of the power of attorney. Quintessa paled so abruptly it was as if all the blood had drained from her. She recognized these papers. "Where from?" she whispered. "I was looking for change," I said, standing up. "Remember, you told me to look for loose change? I found this." I threw the brochure on the table. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped right in front of her. Smiling, old people looked at her from the cheap, glossy paper. "You plan to check me in there in a month?" I said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. "You wanted to sell the brownstone, take the money, and send me to die in a government ward smelling of bleach?" Miss Theodosia gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Mr. Sterling frowned, looking at Quintessa with open disgust. "Mama, that's not what you think," Quintessa began to babble, retreating toward the door. "It's just in case. It's a good sanatorium." "Shut up," I interrupted her. "I know what kind of place that is, and I know what a power of attorney is." I walked right up to her. "You were so worried about housing for the elderly." I took the brochure and put it into her limp hand. "Take it, keep it for yourself. It will come in handy when you get old." "What?" She blinked uncomprehendingly. "Because you won't live here anymore," I said quietly and firmly. "Get out." "You can't kick me out," she screeched, finding her voice. "I'm registered here. This is my home." "This is my apartment," I said. "And I changed the locks this morning. Your keys don't work anymore." "And your things?" I nodded at the suitcase that still stood in the hallway. "Your things are already packed. You didn't even unpack. I'll call the police. I'll sue." "Sue," I shrugged. "But while the court is dealing with it, you have nowhere to live. And if you try to break down the door, Mr. Sterling is a witness that you threatened me with physical harm. And Theodosia, too." I looked at the neighbor. She nodded decisively, setting aside the unfinished sandwich. "I'll confirm it, Uli, and I'll tell the beat cop she wanted to dump you in the poor house." Quintessa looked at the three of us, the united wall against which her greed had smashed. She realized this was the end. She grabbed her suitcase. "Damn you all," she shouted, breaking into a squeal. "Choke on your caviar. I hope you die alone." She flew out of the apartment. The door slammed. Silence fell. Mr. Sterling coughed delicately. "I should probably go, Mrs. Uli. I will pick up the books tomorrow if you permit." Today it seems you need to rest. Thank you, Alice Deister. I nodded. Come tomorrow. When he left and Miss Theodosia, still gasping and lamenting, went to her place, finishing the sandwich on the go, I was left alone. I walked to the door and locked the deadbolt. Click, click. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door. My heart beat steadily. My hands didn't tremble. I returned to the kitchen, picked up the jar of caviar Quintessa had tried to save. It was warm from her hands. I put it back in the fridge on the shelf next to the champagne. Cold is tastier, I said aloud. Ahead was the evening and a whole life, my life. 2 weeks passed, and the air in the apartment changed. It stopped being stale, infused with fear and the dust of the past. Now a draft walked here, light, fresh, smelling of autumn and change. I stepped out onto the balcony, pushing the door with my hip. In my hands was a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a sandwich on a crispy baguette with a thick layer of cream cheese and slices of red fish. On my shoulders lay a new wool shawl, soft terracotta color, warm as an embrace I had missed so much. I bought it with money from the sale of an old fur coat, the very Persian lamb one I had saved for 20 years, which turned out to be eaten by moths. Funny to think, moths ate my coat, and I ate empty porridge to save the coat for the moths. The circle closed, and I broke it. I sat in the wicker chair. Quintessa was gone. She disappeared from my life like a bad dream, leaving behind only silence. After that scene, she tried calling, threatened, cried, knocked on the door, but I told her through the closed door just one phrase. One more call, Quintessa, and I sell the apartment. I'll move to a small studio by the sea, and I'll drink the money away or donate it to a cat shelter. Decide for yourself. The threat worked. The apartment was the last bastion, the last hope for an inheritance. And she was afraid to lose that too. She went quiet, dissolved into the big city, renting a room somewhere and hoping to learn to live on her own money. I looked back at the room through the balcony glass. It was almost empty. No bulky wardrobes, no dark corners, just light space and the few things I really liked. My favorite floor lamp, a comfortable armchair, books. I was no longer the museum curator. I was the resident, the mistress. I picked up a glossy brochure from the table, Mountain Spring Spa Resort. Photos of snowy peaks, hot springs, and happy people wrapped in white robes. A month. I could afford a whole month there. The money from selling the silver spoons and that awful rug I hated burned a hole in my pocket, demanding to be turned into memories, not things, into life. I brought the sandwich to my mouth. Fresh bread crunched, the salty taste of fish mixed with the sweetness of butter. I closed my eyes and started chewing. The taste was familiar, strange, but I knew exactly what this taste was. It was the taste of those diamond earrings my husband gave me for my 30th birthday. They were heavy, pulling down my earlobes, and I wore them only on holidays, afraid to lose them. I hated their cold heaviness. Now I was eating them, and they were delicious. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and hot, like the tears I didn't shed when I found the documents for the nursing home. I smiled broadly, sincerely, turning my face to the autumn sun. This was the taste of freedom, the taste of the fact that I owe nothing to anyone, the taste of the fact that my life belongs to me until the last breath, until the last penny, until the last crumb. I took another bite, and this bite was the most delicious of my life. That is the story, my dear listeners, a story about how one day the cup of patience overflows and a person makes a choice in favor of themselves. What do you think? Did Uli do the right thing? After all, essentially she deprived her daughter of an inheritance. In our society, it is accepted that parents must give everything to their children down to the last shirt. But where is the line when sacrifice turns into encouraging parasitism? Quintessa didn't just live off her mother. She planned to betray her in the cruelest way. Did she deserve such a lesson? Or was Uli too cruel, kicking her own daughter out onto the street? I am very interested in your opinion. Do we often turn our own lives into a museum for someone else, putting off joy for later, for a rainy day that might never come, or for a bright future for children who don't appreciate it? Write in the comments if you have had similar situations. Could you act as decisively as our heroine? If you like this story, if it touched the strings of your soul, please like this video. It is very important to us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. We have many more stories in store about strong people in difficult fates. And of course, share this video with friends. Perhaps someone right now really needs to hear exactly these words. You owe nothing to anyone except yourself. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see two new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.